Hi guys, in this video I'll be recapping part 3 of the Happily Ever After tell-all, which will include Shaun's continuing interview with Julie and Brandon, as well as her interview with Darcey and Georgi, which will include Stacy and Florian. If you haven't yet, please check out my previous video where I covered Shaun's interviews with Cara and Guillermo, as well as the first part of her interview with Brandon and Julia. You can find a link to that video up above, as well as in my playlist for Season 9 of Happily Ever After. If you're interested in recaps of reality shows like 90 Day Fiancé and Love is Blind, please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my other videos and playlists. With the algorithm, it really helps people find my videos when you do that, so thank you. We pick up where we left off with Shaun's interview with Brandon and Julia, where Julia is talking with Brandon's parents. They left us on a cliffhanger last time about whether she'd tell them she's pregnant. Julia says it's hard to explain, and Betty says, "Try." And Betty and Ron look quite stern at this point. Then Brandon tells them she's pregnant, and his parents are suddenly ecstatic. They're jumping up and down and doing a lot of yelping. Then Betty's crying, and most people on the stage are crying too. Betty's like, "That's why we haven't seen you guys. Gosh darn you." She asks if Julia told her parents yet. Julia says yes, that she called them right before she contacted Betty and Ron. Betty's like, "You told them first?" And they pretend to be upset, but are apparently just joking. They ask how far along she is. She tells them 6 months. Betty seems okay with this news, surprisingly, but then says she'd like to have been the first to know, and again is giving the impression she's joking. But knowing Betty, I'm guessing there's some truth to it as well. Shaun tells Brandon's parents that Julia had a reason she didn't share the news sooner, and Julia explains how she had a high-risk pregnancy. She asks them not to say anything to anyone, and alludes to her previous miscarriages. At first Betty says she's going to tell everyone, and Julia gets upset, and I thought it would be a fight. But I guess she was just joking again, and finally says she'll keep it quiet. Betty says when she was pregnant with Brandon, she had complications and was in the hospital for 3 months before he was born. That she was in labor 9 times, and they didn't know if they were going to lose him or not. So she understands and respects Julia's decision about this. Shaun asks Julia, once the baby's here, what would you hope Ron and Betty's involvement will be? Andre says they need to set boundaries. Julia says when she gets back, they'll set some rules. Ron and Betty are still maintaining their smiles as they say, "Oh, okay, that's fine." Ron says they'll do what Julia wants and will honor her wishes. Shaun asks if Ron and Betty will be allowed in the delivery room. Julia says they'll talk about this in the future. Brandon asks, "Will I be allowed in the delivery room?" She repeats, "We'll talk about this in the future." Shaun says congrats again to Ron and Betty, and they click their glasses. They take a break, and Lauren and some cast members give Brandon and Julia hugs and offer more words of support. In their backstage confessional, Julia says the support from her castmates is so important, and that maybe she doesn't need to be scared anymore. Brandon looks like he's falling asleep while standing up here. I really wonder if he has an undiagnosed sleep disorder at this point. Cara gives Julia a hug, and says how weird it is they were just talking about giving birth last night. They show a previously unaired clip where Cara, Julia, and Brandon are talking around a fire in the backyard at the mansion. Cara's saying she can imagine when there's a contentious relationship with the mother-in-law that it adds a lot of strain to your marriage, and when you have a kid it'll get worse. And it shows Brandon and Julia looking at each other like, oh damn. In the clip, Guillermo told them he had a lot of respect for how Cara had a natural birth and with how painful it can be. Cara says in her backstage interview they didn't realize at the time of the conversation that Julia was pregnant, and how she and Guillermo had been discussing in detail the pain of natural childbirth and hopes they didn't scare Julia. Meanwhile, Shaun's telling Julia she doesn't think she's ever cried at a tell-all as she gives her a hug. Cara says Julia can check off her bucket list that she made Shaun Robinson cry. Yara tells Julia that Jovi knew she was pregnant even when Yara argued with him that she wasn't, and how he always catches little details like that. She tells Julia she'll be an amazing mom. In their confessional, Julia tells Brandon she can already tell that Betty is planning her own rules, and she's like, "Nuh-uh-uh." Then they show a confessional for Ron and Betty on the video screen, where Betty's saying she can't believe Brandon and Julia didn't tell them sooner. They're saying how they're glad they have 3 bedrooms, and that Brandon and Julia can move back to their farm. Again, they're sort of joking, but who knows. Betty says she hopes they'll let her in. Her true colors come out now, as she says she doesn't know what kind of mom Julia will be, and that will be the more pertinent question. That was a pretty harsh statement she just slipped in there after acting so nice about everything a minute before. But then she and Ron are excited again as they say, "Yay, we're going to be grandparents," and they hug and high-five each other. Alexi, Guillermo, Brandon, and Matt are sitting backstage, and Brandon asks Alexi if he's heard he made out with a doorknob the night before, referring to the infamous Truth or Dare game in Cara's room. Matt says how they made him suck Jasmine's toe. Cara comes in and says how Darcey and Georgi's interview is coming up, and how there are rumors of Georgi running around on her. She says she thinks he's out in the streets of Miami acting up. I've noticed Kara gets super involved when any conversation turns to someone possibly cheating. I think she might be projecting just a little, but it's just a guess. She says there have been sketchy things Darcey said that made her suspicious. They show another previously unseen clip, this one from the Truth or Dare game, where Darcey's telling everyone she and Georgie haven't had schmecks for 6 months, and Kara's saying how Georgie's young and has to be getting it from somewhere, which only adds to Darcey's growing insecurities. In the clip, Julia asks if Darcey thinks Georgie's cheating on her. Darcey says she's seen him network, as he calls it, but she considers it flirting. In her backstage confessional, she says she wants to find resolution with her and Georgie, and she doesn't want to waste her precious time anymore. Hi guys, just a reminder to please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks! With everyone back on stage, Shaun turns her attention to Darcey and Georgi. She says when she left off with them at their last tell-all interview, they weren't in a good place, and asks where they are today. Darcey says she feels he's still holding back a lot, and there's no resolution, and she's not sure what the future holds. Shaun asks Georgi to characterize their relationship. He says they're still trying to find the best way to communicate. He tries to continue talking, but Darcey cuts him off and says they're in an avoidant mindset, by which she's clearly referring to Georgi's mindset. Georgi looks annoyed at this. Shaun says Darcey has been bothered by Georgi's lack of transparency, and that he finally opened up to her and it wasn't what she wanted to hear. They play a clip of the scene of Darcey and Georgi at a bar where he tells her how in Bulgaria, when he saw his sister with her kids, he suddenly realized he wants kids. Darcey's asking why he didn't tell her this before. He tries to talk, and just like at the tell-all, she also interrupts him in the clip, and he explodes at her, saying, "Can't you just listen to me?" They were nice to Darcey in the footage they showed by not including the shots of her inebriated interview outside the bar. She seemed pretty sauced in most of that scene when I watched it, and they edited out all those drunky parts and gave her a good tell-all edit. Darcey says he knew going into the relationship that she couldn't have kids, and how he always said he didn't want them. She says if he truly wants a child, she'd rather walk away and live the rest of her life for her. Shaun asks Darcey if she thinks this could be an exit strategy for Georgi. Darcey says maybe, because right after they were married, the dynamic in their relationship changed, that he has his work visa and citizenship papers, and now that he has that, the relationship was very convenient for him. The thing is, though, didn't Georgi already have his citizenship when he met Darcey? He'd previously been married to another American woman for several years before hooking up with her, so I'd assume that was the case. If so, I'm curious why he doesn't bring this up. If anyone knows about this, please let me know in the comments. Shaun asks the cast if they think Georgi might have one foot out the door. But before she can finish her question, Kara pipes up and says, "For sure." She says this is a convenient moment where Georgi can say he wants children now that he has his document. Julia comes to Georgi's defense and says she didn't previously want kids either, and that Georgi might have genuinely changed his mind after being around family. Shaun then invites Stacy and Florian on stage. Shaun says Stacy and Florian have been listening backstage, and wants to know their opinions on Georgi wanting to have kids. Stacy says it's a little out of the blue considering he's known Darcey a long time. Shaun asks if Stacy thinks it could be an exit strategy, as if she didn't know how Stacy would answer. Surprising no one, Stacy says she wouldn't put it past him. Yara asks Georgi if he wants to have kids with Darcey or with someone else. Georgi says if Darcey can have kids and wants them, he'd have them with her. But with the fact that she can't, he's torn about it. Kara gives Guillermo a look. Shaun asks if a biological child is the only option for Georgi. He says there are lots of other ways. He mentions surrogacy, and Darcey says she doesn't have eggs left, so it would technically be someone else's child with Georgi. Shaun asks if he'd be open to adoption. He says he'd prefer surrogacy to adoption, and ultimately that he'd prefer a biological child. Julia asks a pretty silly question, and says if Stacey has eggs left, maybe she can give them to Darcey, since they have the same DNA. And you can see Brandon smiling at this. Stacey declines and jokes that her eggs are probably older than Darcey's, even though Darcey's a few seconds older than her. Darcey says that would mean a baby between Stacey and Georgi, and she wouldn't want that. Shaun brings up Darcey and Georgi's recent trip to Bulgaria, and how Georgi had asked her to dress more conservatively for his parents. She asks if he was being overly critical, or did Darcey not understand how serious he was being. They showed 2 clips where Georgi explains that Darcey shouldn't wear her Miami clothes to Bulgaria, or people could think she's a prostitute or whore. Shaun asks Georgi if he regrets calling Darcey those names. He says he didn't call her those names, but that he doesn't want people to think those things about her. I agree with Georgi that he didn't call her names. He just said he didn't want other people to think she was those things, and I don't see how there could be confusion about that. He says he grew up in a conservative town where if a woman wears revealing clothes, the local people would likely think she's a prostitute. He says Miami is different, where everyone walks around with skimpy clothes. Yara says she understands he didn't want people to judge his wife. Jasmine isn't helpful as she says, I get what he's saying. Miami clothes equals Bulgarian prostitute whore. I think the editing for the clips they showed was not in Georgi's favor. They showed the clips out of context, not bothering to show Darcey being difficult to him just prior to his getting frustrated with her. I'm curious how anyone could be confused about how Georgi is trying to explain that his culture is conservative, and so are his parents, that it's not him enforcing his opinion on her. He hadn't seen his family in 12 years, so it makes sense he wanted to make a good impression. It seems like production is trying to railroad Georgi to make him look like the bad guy. They should also show the numerous clips of Darcey and Stacey ganging up on him, and attacking him every chance they get. I don't think he's a saint, but he should have a fair chance like everyone else to explain himself. Stacey says she thinks Georgi should give Darcey the benefit of the doubt. She says when she and Darcey travel to places like Dubai, they both dress conservatively, and that Darcey was dressed very classy in Bulgaria. I disagree that she was dressed appropriately in Bulgaria, or that she even tried to. But I will say at least they're smart enough to know to dress conservatively in Dubai. Jasmine's like, to be fair, this is the most covered I've ever seen Darcey. Shaun asks what the other couples think about the fact that it took Georgi 5 years to introduce Darcey to his family. Julia says she's curious why it took so long, and Kara also wants to know. Georgi says his family doesn't speak English, and Darcey doesn't speak Bulgarian, so there's a language barrier. I do think this is a lame excuse, but he probably was nervous about introducing Darcey to his family with how she acts sometimes, and I can't really blame him. Also, he hasn't seen his family in 12 years himself, so there's probably some kind of issue with his family that he hasn't shared. Darcey says he has a habit of talking to his family when she's not around, and she doesn't feel included. Kara gives Guillermo another look. Shaun brings up how Darcey felt Georgi wasn't being honest with his finances, and how he felt he had good reason to keep this info private. They show a clip where Georgi's talking to Florian about this issue, when they were in New York for Fashion Week. He's saying how Darcey's always telling him what to do with his money, and that he's trying to save to be independent and invest for the future. When he says this, they show Stacey's reaction shot where she says, bingo. I think TLC is again being shady with their choice of clips, because that was an admittedly bad clip for Georgi, but there are so many clips of Darcey and Stacey being awful to him, so to me it's a wash. Then they show a clip of Darcey, Georgi, Stacey, and Florian in the hotel lobby in Bulgaria when Georgi mentions that Darcey and Stacey don't have any money. In the clip, Darcey and Stacey are like, what are you talking about? We have money? And Florian is smiling like he knows Georgi is telling the truth. Georgi is saying how they spend all their money on clothes and surgery. They show a reaction shot of Jasmine laughing. Shaun asks why Georgi said they were broke. He says they accuse him of taking Darcey's money, and that he's never looking for money from her. Darcey says she doesn't think he'd have been with her if she didn't have money. Shaun still wants to know the tea, and again asks Georgi why he said they were broke. He says they're irresponsible, that he can't speak for Stacey, and Stacey cuts him off and yells, well, you did! Take it back, Georgi! As Georgi tries to talk, Darcey keeps interrupting him. He says he's trying to explain and doesn't want to yell over her, and Stacey's like, well, you do it at home. Shaun asks, but do you think Darcey is broke? Georgi says she's always talking about how much she spends on clothes, but at this point, Darcey and Stacey both start yapping at once and cut him off. Darcey says how she has a trust fund, which I think we all could have guessed. She says she and Georgi have a shared account, but they don't put anything in it. She explains that she pays the rent at the first of the month, and he gives her his half for the rent and his share of the bills. To me, that sounds like he's paying his share, so I'm not sure what the issue is. Shaun asks Darcey how she feels about hearing Georgi in the clip saying how he's saving for independence because he doesn't trust her. Darcey says he should trust her, and Kara gives a sympathetic look. Stacey says to Darcey, did you tell everyone what he said the day after you got married? And with dramatic music, it goes to commercial like it was a soap opera. When they come back, Darcey says, the day after they got married, Georgi told her if they got divorced, she'd have to support him for 10 years. That is pretty damning if he said that, but I'd like to know the context. Because if Darcey was acting like she usually does to him that day, I might sympathize with him for making statements about potentially getting divorced. The supporting him for 10 years part is something he probably shouldn't have said though. Shaun asks Georgi if he said that. He says he doesn't think so. He tries to continue and Darcey is interrupting him again. I wish I could explain what he said, but she interrupted so many times I couldn't catch it. Darcey says when they got married, she should have talked to lawyers first like her dad suggested. That she has everything to lose in the marriage and is wasting precious time. He says he's losing his time too. She tells him to just go. Kara gives Guillermo another look. Darcey tells Georgi to go find his baby mama. Georgi says that's rude. Stacey says Darcey's better off without him, especially now that she knows he wants kids. Shaun says to Stacey, so you think he's not in it for the long haul? Stacey says she thinks they're both not in it for the long haul. Kara's like, well, damn. Then Stacey drops a bombshell, and says she and Florian don't even live together anymore, that he's checked out. She says he just left, and that after the last tell-all, he got a job in Connecticut doing woodworking. She says Florian is an American citizen now. Everyone applauds, and Brandon wakes up to clap. She says he left her just before he got his citizenship. That she asked him if he'd go back to Miami, and he told her no. She says she thinks there's someone else. Shaun asks why he's not moving back to Miami. Florian says he doesn't have a job there, and that he told her he could go back and forth to Miami, and she could move to Connecticut. Stacey says now that he got his citizenship, she feels frauded, and like she's been used, and they show a shot of Gino nodding at this. That's where we'll leave off for now. Please be sure to look for my wrap-up of part 3 of the tell-all to come out in another day or so, where Shaun will wrap up her interview with the Silva twins. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching.